Here's a hot take. I think that just do horizontal presses for your delts is not great advice for most people because it never comes from the type of people that have the delts that I want. It's actually 3 exercises in addition to doing like a normal overhead press and lateral raises, of course. They give me the type of results that I've always wanted, and I think everybody should do them. Fellas, what are your 3 favorite shoulder exercises? Try to guess mine, and let's get started. All right, fellas, we're back at the gym. I'm racing my buddy Sam to a 405 overhead press. The winner is paying the losers all expense paid trip to Turkey for a hair transplant. Fellas, our first lift is going to be the behind the neck press. And all jokes aside, it's going to fill a corrective slot as well as a hypertrophy exercise that carries over to our other shoulder exercises. In fact, my shoulders felt like shit until I started doing this consistently. And I've mentioned in the past generically that I've done this lift, but I stopped doing it then because I sucked at it and it made me feel bad. But I'm serious about making progress. So let's eat that horse. Anyway, this exercise realistically is going to be your biggest indicator, in my opinion, of how strong and just mobile your shoulders are in general, since it's the purest vertical press that you can do. I recommend doing it on a Smith machine if possible because it's the most stable, and use back support for the same reason while you're at it. Now, this is going to be a top movement that facilitates mobility and stability for your overhead movements, your shoulder exercises, on top of being just weak as fuck for most people, quite frankly. So there's a lot of room to improve on it for most people, including myself. Behind the neck press in general feels more natural over time, I'd say. It's not a particularly injurious exercise. Realistically, it's going to be pretty similar to a seated dumbbell overhead press, except for it's more stable and probably even safer because of that. The biggest predictor of injury, in my opinion, is using an exercise or just a form in general that is jamming your joints on top of your joints and moving your body in a way that it just physically cannot move without you forcing it to without load. So when you add load to that, and then you add too much load, and then you use things like a lack of eccentric control, that's what's going to promote injury, just in my experience and in my opinion. There are fringe cases where that's not really applicable, just depending upon if you have a pre-existing medical condition. But in general, that's how I tend to look at exercise selection. And it's not really anything crazy. It's just a dumbbell press, essentially. I kept it relatively light until it felt mindless form-wise, though. And then after that, I started blasting it hard into failure. And form-wise, while we're talking about common sense form, it's on a Smith machine. It's on a fixed path, so you don't need to overthink it. It's more so about, like I said, gradually loading a good range of motion and then going ham on it once the form feels mindless. This should be tip of the spear when it comes to a whole shoulder hypertrophy exercise. And once you build up the mobility for it, you're going to be good to go in terms of using it as such. I'll probably never take this out of my program, to be honest with you. Like I said, my shoulders felt like complete garbage until I started including this regularly in my program. And one of my biggest training mistakes, because I always on and off have shoulder discomfort, that's why I say this. One of my biggest training mistakes, in my opinion, is not having this in my program a lot earlier than I started including it recently. I remember the first time that I did this, it felt incredible. And I stopped doing it because, like I said, the weights that you use on it, especially when you're starting off, are not very impressive. But quite frankly, that is an extremely terrible reason to not do an exercise. So make sure you do your behind the neck presses, build up a common sense range of motion, common sense loading, and then blast them. Next up is the high incline Smith machine bench press. Again, you can use this with a barbell if you really need to, but I do recommend that you do it on the Smith machine because it's more stable. You can push it harder, safer that way. Not that a barbell is unsafe, but it's just the maximized version of this. But if behind the neck press is about building the base of your shoulder strength, high incline bench is about taking that base and then building a surplus of shoulder strength. Which, by the way, you didn't mishear me when I said that the winner is going to be paying for that hair transplant. I have absolutely no intentions of winning this contest. I am going to be the loser on the road to the 405 overhead press so that I can receive that trip to Turkey. But this is an excellent upper pec exercise, and I've definitely highlighted it as such, both in my top 10 exercises that I liked in 2023 or 2024. Holy crap. Everything is a blur. But because the incline is set so high, you also get a lot of delts in there too. This movement is going to have direct carryover to your normal seated or standing overhead press because you're overloading the relevant muscles with a good amount of weight from a really well leveraged position in terms of the way that your upper pecs and your shoulders, like your front delts, are leveraged. You're leaned back, you're going to be able to lift more weight. It's just the way it works. Form-wise, with the high incline, it's really simple. Again, I just want to preamble and say that nothing that you do is inherently dangerous, provided that, again, you're not moving in an unnatural movement pattern, you're loading it appropriately, and you're using a common sense form protocol. But I do, with this exercise, I skin my chin, meaning like the bar is as close to my nose and my chin as I can possibly get it, just to be in a good line of like force transfer to my upper pecs and my shoulders. And like I said, I'll skin my chin and my nose and touch the highest part of my upper chest while flaring my elbows. For me, that's going to stretch those two muscle groups a lot more than if I were to tuck it in. And realistically, at this point, not only does that feel better on my shoulders, it's just how I naturally come into play with this movement, but it also feels a lot better on my left distal bicep tendon. It's feeling a lot better. However, when I jam it into certain positions, it just doesn't feel great, but this feels really natural, so that's what I do. And it has those benefits of working the muscles more effectively as well. Again, just like with the behind the neck press, just load this up intelligently. Use your common sense, use a common sense load, common sense form, meaning a good quality eccentric. You're not bouncing the weight off your tendons, and you're going to be good to go. Yep, with that free, all-expense paid tour trip to Turkey, I think the first thing I'm going to do is head to the GTA barbershop, get me a little spiky mohawk or rainbow afro or some shit like that. Ass to grass dips. Ass to grass weighted dips with the most range of motion that you can do antagonistically stretch the delt relative to the overhead position. And what that means is just a gigabrain way of saying it's a good way of keeping your pecs, your shoulders pliable and mobile. That's what I find it to be useful for. This movement realistically is going to be more of a pec exercise than a shoulder exercise in terms of hypertrophy. However, the front delt is going to get a little bit of work as well. So provided that you're doing your behind the neck press, you're doing your high incline Smith machine bench press, you're doing your lateral raises and things of that nature, you're going to be good to go. I don't believe I mentioned this at the beginning of the little training segment, but first of all, fellas, I don't want to talk about common sense shit today. So obviously just do some form of heavy overhead press, whether that be seated or standing, and then some form of lateral raises. I think, most people know that, we've all heard the spam lateral raises mean. Overhead press is the quintessential shoulder exercise. I'm talking about things that you do in adjunct to that to allow you to have smoother progress or create progress where you haven't seen it before. Anyway, the other real benefit for doing these for your shoulders is actually somewhat synergistic, but not really direct. And by that, I mean they build lockout strength specific to your vertical presses. Particularly, you're going to want to pause your dips at the top. And that's if you choose to do more of a street lifting style dip where it's a mutant exercise. It's not really great for anything other than lifting a bunch of weight. Or you do your dips to just parallel. I recommend doing them ATG, but no matter what you do, anatomically, you're handling far more load when you're pressing down than when you're pressing up or when you're pressing horizontally. So take advantage of that extra stress on the triceps and just pause at the top for most of your reps. That could either be like a 1 count pause. I like to say count starting from 0, so 0, 1, or it could be a 1 Mississippi. Provided that you're holding stress at the top, you're going to get the full benefit. Try that out. Let me know what you think. How did this get here? I can't count, man. I'm terrible at math. As a little bonus, I guess, since we're terrible at math and can't count to 4 effectively, just throwing some reverse flies of some kind. Reverse pec deck is my personal favorite, and I think it's the best one you can do because, again, it's more stable than like a reverse dumbbell fly or a Powell raise, which are both really good. But again, this is just about maximizing our more targeted exercises to make them more about working the muscle and less about thinking about what you're doing, if that makes sense. On top of all that, it still has a really good range of motion. Now, you can get a bigger stretch. Someone that has seen this on TikTok or Instagram Reels or something, you can get the bigger stretch by sitting sideways and then doing them unilaterally. But to me, that limits the load, and it takes twice as long to work both sides of your delts. So, or rather, both sides of your body, each rear delt. So I don't do that personally. I'm not going to say I don't recommend that because it does have a use case, but I personally cannot be bothered to do that. For working the rear delts, rows and pull downs are great, but I really enjoy direct rear delt isolation work, primarily not just for the hypertrophy, like they work great for building your muscles up, but they fill that pump and blood flow slot that other movements like compound exercises sometimes don't do as well, just depending upon what your strengths and weaknesses are. Pump work, though, is extremely important for keeping you healthy. It's not necessarily going to give you a hypertrophy stimulus, but it's going to keep your tendons and your joints healthy, help them recover more quickly if they're tweaked because they're avascular, meaning they don't have veins, so they don't recover like muscles do. If you have any sort of tendinitis, blood flow is almost always a good remedy for that, provided it's not causing pain, the pump work. Fellas, thanks for watching. If you want examples of how to fit these exercises and programs, check out my free programs on Boostcamp. There's something in there for everyone. There's a free version of my newest program, Golden Warrior, linked at the end of this video. And if you want to support my work, grab my new specialty bar, the Omni Bar, in the pinned comment and description. Donate it to your gym or use it in your home gym. What are 3 exercises you like? Let me know. See you later.